All right, welcome to the show today. My guest today is Carlo Cisco. He's the founder and CEO of Select, which has been called AMEX for the next generation. It's basically a private membership community and concierge service that connects members with exclusive and unlimited benefits at over 1.6 million locations around the world. Carlo's got a really interesting story. He started his career in finance and had a stint at Groupon in Japan where he helped grow that business from a six-figure a month business to 20 million plus business a month in only 2 months. So crazy growth and a lot of lessons learned in that stage of his career. And most recently, he is working on Select, and really fascinating business that I enjoyed diving into. We talked about how he solved the chicken and egg problem of the marketplace business model, where you've got to build up strong merchant partnerships whilst also building up your consumer user base at the same time. How he's actually managed to get some of these amazing venues on board, and how he's kept the retention rate for those partners so high, above 95% renewal. So super interesting business. He's really changing the credit card industry, and I really enjoyed talking about his journey. So let's get into the interview here. All right, Carlo, thank you for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. So yeah, everything you're doing at the moment with Select is really awesome, and I really want to dive into that and find out a bit more about that. But I wanted to start a little bit on your background and your story. So I
Sure.
was wondering, were you always entrepreneurial? I believe even in college you were sort of doing some things back then. Maybe if you could just tell us a bit of your story.
Yeah, sure. So I was always pretty entrepreneurial. I did start a business in school, very business, very different, although in some ways similar to the business today. But I started an event planning and promotion business while I was at school down at University of Miami. So basically doing like these large scale events, anywhere from like 100 to around 1,000 people. Kind of like taking over a venue for the night, and creating a unique experience around it. And did that primarily with top nightlife venues all throughout Miami, and then later started doing things with restaurants and hotels and that kind of thing. So pretty cool kind of first experience for like consumer marketing, like getting people to come to these events, and then also for working directly with business owners. You're usually working with either the owner, or if it's a pretty big place or big group, someone who's in charge of marketing, something like that. So a pretty fun experience to be having when you're like 18 through 22.
Yeah, it's a perfect business for that age bracket.
Yeah, it's a fun time for that time of life. And while I was doing that, I sort of had internships across various areas of finance. I was also managing my own investment portfolio, kind of taking the proceeds from the company, putting them in the market. It worked out really awesome, fortunately. And then, since then, so like when I graduated, came up here to New York, got a job in equity trading. Liked it, didn't love it. It was, kind of the exact opposite of investing. I loved being attached to financial markets, but it was very short-term focused. And I sort of like to do the exact opposite, which is like betting big on things I really believed in. Apple was my first stock, for
That's a good
example.
pick.
Yeah, it was a good pick. Not quite my highest return, but it was up there. Definitely high up there.
Can you say what the
And
highest was? Or
Baidu, actually. I got Baidu at the peak of the recession.
wow.
So it was just completely mispriced. And then, of course, experienced a lot of growth. That was also before they had kicked Google out of China. So certainly having access to their leading search engine prior to that occurring did not hurt anything.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was pretty cool. Yeah.
Where where did that? I guess is that all just skills you learned in college, or was it kind of self taught? Or because I think there's a lot of people who go into finance, but they don't
Right.
necessarily kind of build their own portfolio and do all these things that you did.
Yeah.
So what do you kind of put those skills down to?
I think it is kind of self-taught. It's an environmental thing a little bit. So I was very lucky to be able to go to some really great schools, dating back as early as to my middle school. Actually was sort of like a science and technology and math focused school. So it was actually there that I learned about Apple, for example. That, this is like whatever it was, 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago. Every computer there was Apple. Like, and that was not when Apple was a big thing. And they just felt like that was the best sort of equipment for us to be using. So that was sort of my first exposure there. The investment side isn't that different. Like, my family was always sort of like lightly interested in that. No one was like actively managing a portfolio or something like that, but they like to keep an eye on it. So I got exposed to that, and then took classes around that in high school. High school is actually when I won like my first investment competition. We had one in class for sort of who could get the highest return in a 6-month period. And I kind of crushed it. I made a risky, but kind of crushed it, and ended up taking the reins on like the investment club there and that kind of thing. I'm like, lame or cool or whatever, I have no idea. Business and investments are just the things that interested me. I was doing sports and that kind of stuff because it was required. It honestly didn't interest me. What's always interested me is business and investments, pretty much.
Got it. Makes sense. And just sort of going a little bit just back to that first business you had with the events company, because I'm just curious, what actually prompted you to start that? Because
that's a great question.
A lot of people in college would go to those venues, as we were talking about before, but you kind of had this idea to actually make a business around it. So maybe you could tell me about that.
Yeah, and actually, I can't even credit myself with my involvement. Essentially, what happened is someone else at the university who was older, who was working with these venues already, just sort of noticed that like I was taking charge of like sort of where we should go. Here's the cool place, this kind of stuff, and that people were following my lead. And he essentially like asked to sit down and chat. Was like, you can get paid for this. Like people are following you around more or less, right? And like, it's not that I'm such a special person, people are following me. I was just sort of, I liked doing the legwork of figuring out where we can have the best experience that evening. And then of course, like creating that experience is kind of a natural extension of that. And we were able to make it much bigger thing because that was sort of, I was in school right as Facebook was like taking off. I graduated high school in 2005, so I was going into school at that time. So Facebook was like a huge thing. So we were doing a lot of marketing for events on Facebook, and that was before it was spammy. So it was definitely a good channel to use for that. But yeah, I really have to kind of credit him with that. I don't think he realized quite how well it would work either, but it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, that's cool. Got it. All right. Well, what happened next for you? Was that sort of when you ended up joining Groupon, or what was the kind of?
Yeah. So right after the equity trading role, so I had a role in that in New York for about a year and a half. Liked it, didn't love it. Sort of out of nowhere, noticed that an acquaintance of mine had gotten a role with Groupon. And this is actually someone who had come to speak at the university, but I had sort of like kept in touch a little bit. Reached out to congratulate him. This is 2010, when Groupon was, essentially emerging as like the fastest growing company in history. So I was like, oh, that's awesome. Congrats, whatever. And he's like, well, actually, like, we're looking for people like you. Would you be interested in working with us? So like a few long phone interviews later, ended up getting an offer to go to Groupon in Japan and, essentially be part of a team of about 12 who was brought in from countries all over the world to build Groupon in Japan. So that was an unbelievable experience to have at that age. I was 23 at the time. I was one of the youngest people. I was the second youngest person on that entire team. To sort of be in charge of, they did acquire a company to enter, so we weren't building it from scratch, but we were taking that business, which was like a 6-figure a month revenue business, and within 2 months, 20 million a month.
Wow.
So
insane.
Groupon was the ultimate kind of like startup on steroids story, and Japan epitomized that. But we were able also to overcome a lot of challenges and make it work there. And became we had about 48 markets at that point in terms of countries, and Japan was number 3 within that same 2-month period.
That's amazing. I got a few questions on that because I think
Yeah,
there's definitely some good
that's an
learnings in
interesting
there.
story. Yeah.
So, first of all, I guess, what do you put that growth down to? Like, that's crazy growth to just come in and do that in 2 months. Like,
Right.
it's insane. So, yeah, have you thought about that, where that came from mostly?
So it's a mix of factors, and what it ultimately comes down to is execution. Groupon was already growing so quickly in other places that they were able to raise the kind of money, acquire the right kind of assets that would further that growth in new markets. So a lot of international at that point was run by one of the Sam Ware brothers, which is for those unfamiliar, basically a group of guys who are somewhat notorious for copying U.S. businesses in other markets and would rather frequently sell them back to the existing business. That's what happened with Groupon. It was one of the first times, I don't really know the history since, where it was more of an equity exchange. People know that now after IPO and stuff like that. So they were actually helping grow it. So it was a lot of having the right brand, story, resources, and team. And I think one of the things they did that's different, that's a good learning experience for people, is they were mostly hiring like young and hungry, like not quite as young as I was. I was a little unusual, but like sort of people that had a few to several years of experience, not typically decades, but who had worked at top companies or had their own businesses. Basically, people they could tell were like very, very smart and ready to work super, super hard. And like that's like working at Groupon was not a 9 to 5, particularly in that era. It was more of like a 9 to 10 to midnight, depending on the night of the week. So there's definitely a lot of work that goes into it, a lot of hiring that goes into it, and a lot of things to overcome. One of the main competitors owned some of the media sources, so we had to be super careful about not messing up, basically. That's sort of makes it so any mess up is highlighted pretty prominently. But look, like overall, like right sort of team was in place to execute quickly, ramp that revenue up, and then actually bring costs down. Not quite to profitability right away, but not that far off.
Yeah, got it. It's amazing. And I guess, what was that like on a personal level as well, going to a completely different culture like Japan from the US? And
definitely a bit of a culture shock. I was lucky that it was sort of like the right time in my life for that. Like I remember even talking to my manager at the financial firm. He's like, look, that's such an incredible opportunity. Like there's no way I can tell you not to do it. Like if for some reason it doesn't work out, startups are crazy. Like you can always come back. But you should absolutely give that a shot. So I had that kind of flexibility. It was definitely a surprise to my family, I think, that I was moving to Japan. And then actually the plan was to go to Japan and then China, but I ended up staying in Japan because the teams I was with there asked if I could stay, essentially. But it was definitely a big life change, definitely a bit of a culture shock. The culture there is honestly incredible. It's just a lot more about the community of whole. But one of the things that was challenging is like, this is a day when Google Translate didn't work perfectly. The language barrier is major, really tough. It's not like going to a European country where there's some similarity and people are speaking some English. No, that's not happening. I remember getting off the plane, asking where the bus was, and getting a completely blank stare. So it's just hard a little bit in that regard. But what made it better is you had a team of people who were from all over. So like we stuck pretty closely together. And then over time, like you sort of like learn how to use the transportation and those sort of things. So I honestly loved it. I don't think there was ever a situation where I would live there permanently, but I definitely didn't mind being there.
Yeah, it's awesome. And was there a big difference, did you find, just in the way people did business in general? So not just like the language barrier in terms of like culture, but just in terms of actually running a business? Were there things that surprised you that you had to keep in mind, or was it sort of fairly similar in your situation?
There were some key differences for sure. So one of the first ones with a company growing that fast is generally when someone's joining a business, they're sort of joining it for life, more or less. So there are definitely lessons learned around hiring people that quickly. But that is sort of the expectation, and sort of finding the right way to kind of, get to the right kind of talent pool that you actually need for the business. I think another one, which is hard when you have a company that's moving that fast, and look, at that point, like, I don't know if any companies ever move that quickly, but sort of the meeting process there is a little different. They kind of like to have a meeting, discuss, reflect, have another meeting. So there's a niceness to that, but it's not the most conducive need. So sort of like negotiating the right structures there for what makes sense for the company. But overall, pretty cool business climate. It is, a bit similar to the US in the sense that, like, people are really hardworking. There's also like a heightened level of loyalty. So a lot of times, like, the team would want to be in there as late as we were in there, and we're like, go home. You don't need to be here at 9 o'clock. You can't call anybody. Just leave. Go be with your family, whatever. And people don't want to listen to that. They feel like everyone's in it together, which is a nice sentiment, but obviously you want people to be able to have some sort of personal life on the whole. But yeah, overall incredible culture, some similarities, but some big differences too.
Yeah, it's fascinating insight. And so I guess what happened there after to Groupon? Like, how did you sort of wrap up there, or what was your next stage?
That's a little bit of a story, to be honest. So basically the catalyst for coming back was this massive earthquake that occurred there. This was in 2011. And it was one of those where just kind of, I think it might still be like the 5th largest earthquake in history. It like shifted the Earth's axis, moved the island of Japan. Big deal. And sort of, it wasn't even so much that, but it was about the ensuing tsunamis and nuclear meltdown and all that kind of stuff. Essentially, they sent everyone at Groupon who wasn't from Japan back to wherever their initial location was. We had also sort of, by that point, actually done our job of kind of establishing the market. So the options are basically, go to another country for Groupon, and people have varying options. But my initial path was China. Groupon in China was tough, and I knew that. So my thought was, okay, I was presented with the option of like doing that or getting paid to stay put. I went with option B. I had an idea for a startup before I had done any of this kind of. So I was like, okay, like, I'll get paid to stay put. I'll see if I can make some, see if I can figure out how I want to do this startup, and then started on that company.
Awesome. Got it. So was that company that was that Food Fan?
Yes. Yeah. So that's correct. That's sort of my first tech startup. A lot of learnings there. Essentially the goal of it was to create a restaurant search and discovery site that was using unique characteristics about the restaurants to make far more personalized recommendations, and then sort of aggregating all the different information that were at that point was very fragmented into one place to make that decision process easier. And essentially what we saw is it took longer than I had expected to get everything off the ground. We actually had like kind of awesome initial traction because all these unique data points we had collected got picked up by search engines. So we had thousands of people every day coming to the site via being ranked on sites like Google and that kind of thing. So we were, without spending money on advertising, building up a user base. However, in the course of time it took to build that business, Yelp grew by a magnitude of 10. It also fixed a lot of data problems that I thought were sort of major issues. The other thing that happened is Google had acquired Zagat, obviously with the intention of very aggressively, sort of making headway into the restaurant search space. So while there's like, companies technically still operational, I don't touch it. I haven't touched it in years. sort of while there was still some good metrics and everything, I just didn't see it being a market where we could win,
Yeah.
create something that was really going to change the game or change the industry. I felt like at best we were building features that someone else could buy, and then of course there's the risk of someone else implementing those features on their own.
Mm.
Open Google, they have a lot more resources than any startup's going to have. So it just would have been hard to win, and
Yeah.
that's why I decided to shift my focus to Select. Basically told our like co-founder CTO was like, if you're interested in running this, run it. Like, I'm kind of hands off. I want to pursue this other thing.
Got it. Yeah, sometimes it really does just come down to that timing in a way of the
Yeah,
climate changes over time of that industry or whatever the problem is you're trying to solve, and things outside of your control can just
yeah,
make it almost impossible or just a lot less likely that it's going to succeed. So I totally get that in terms of wanting
absolutely.
to pivot there.
Yeah.
Was any did you have any like big lessons or anything from that journey with that startup? Anything that springs to mind or
I think main takeaways were I think at the point I made that decision, some people might have questioned it theoretically, particularly if we had brought in more capital. We had raised like a couple 100,000, like kind of friends and family thing. So fortunately, everyone there was like understanding of, I want to go do a new opportunity.
mm,
But I think that was a very mature decision. There just wasn't any way to, like I said, win, and sort of like the added time expenditure and all that, I think would have been a pretty big risk for me professionally. So I think like kind of seeing the writing on the wall is something that's actually pretty important to do when that
mm,
situation hits you. Like we could have had plenty of arguments for raising more capital and this and that, but you just got to be realistic with yourself and
mm,
sort of what your goals for creating a business are. I think the other one that's like a general kind of business piece of advice is just like, getting the right tech talent can be hard, but it's really important. And,
mm,
that's what slowed us down. It wasn't that we were waiting on contracts or that kind of thing. It's hard to have the right kind of team and sort of, one of the key things is having someone who's there with you. I think there's sort of a inclination to outsource, and like that can, whether that's, in the US domestically or not, doesn't matter. Someone else building it, I can see the merit in that. I can see where that launches products more quickly, or whatever. But you've got to have a main tech person. Like you
yeah,
need someone who's your main go-to person, and they can't be in another country. They can't be working another job. They've got to be working on your project all the time, so that anytime there's an issue, someone's ready to address it. And also, anytime you hire people, whether they're working in your internal team or externally, that they can interface with them and know what they're doing and know how long things should take, how they should be done properly, all of that. So I would say those are the two big takeaways from that business.
got it. They're good lessons. Yeah, make sure you have the right tech talent, and then try and avoid that commitment and consistency bias of
Yeah, you
thinking that
got
you
to pay
have
attention
to.
to the market, right?
Yeah,
You got to pay attention to the market. The market can change, and you can't ignore it.
got it. All right. Well, what happened next for you then? So you kind of mentioned before this is where sort of Select
Yeah. So this
started.
is
So what happened next?
Yeah, so this is where we transitioned into or started Select, and essentially the initial concept for Select was actually an extension of the food fan business. It was one of the several channels for monetization, was to create this membership that provided access to sort of sizable but not crazy discounts and special benefits at like the best places in town. Something that would create loyalty for these businesses, help them acquire the right customers, and then on customer side would just be super flexible, super easy to use, et cetera. And when we took a sort of hard look at doing that, we're like, okay, there's one, no reason to limit this to dining. Let's make this for everything. And then two, when we were looking at positioning it, took a hard look at the credit card space and almost couldn't believe the opportunity we saw there, where we've got all these massive companies, all these cards carrying annual fees anywhere from $95 to $2,500 in the case of Centurion, plus the $7,500 initiation fee, and they were all doing the same shit. They were all, they were all sort of, oh, here's 2x points or 3x points or whatever. Maybe you have a concierge, and occasionally we'll do this, that. Excuse the language, seemed like bullshit, and didn't really seem like a necessary evolution of that industry. So we're like, okay, wow, this is a good opportunity. And our initial positioning was the card was that it could be linked with any existing credit or debit card, that turned it into this black card that provided access to exclusive events, pricing, and perks at thousands of different locations. And obviously over time that network has grown. Now it's 1.6 million locations. But that was the core concept. And we definitely saw multiple market movements with this business as well. And again, it's about how you respond to that.
Totally, yeah. And I guess, so just to summarize that, so essentially you've got, like your big players like your AMEX or whatever, who have all these kind of reward schemes where, supposedly you pay this.
Actually, that's a good word for it. They need to use that word here more.
What's that, sorry?
Like scheme can have a bit of a dual meaning in the US. It can have and I actually think that's appropriate. People should be right here.
Got it. So yeah, you kind of got these systems that they have set up, and then basically, they're supposedly great and you get all these benefits, but then you kind of came in and you saw, well, you're spending a lot of money for membership, but what kind of benefits are you actually getting? They're not that great. So that was kind of the gap you saw there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a twofold gap. Like there's definitely a gap on the merchant side as well. It's sort of hard, especially for, we call them best in class businesses, but like places people actually want to go to, places that are trendy, popular, well-rated, whatever the case may be. Like it's hard for them to have the right marketing channels, because they can't take out an ad in the newspaper. That looks horrible. They can't, put something on a billboard. They can't, sort of most marketing channels are limited for them, because it's about sort of building up this brand and this thing that means something, that draws people in organically. And we're like a great complementary channel to that, because we're only working with those types of businesses. We have all the right kinds of customers. So like Select is one of those rare sort of like brand elevating channels that gets someone not just to come once, but to come back again and again. And there's definitely the use case there as well. Then on the credit card side, like current rewards are, frankly, almost ridiculous. And the only reason for that is because no one's been able to innovate in this space. And this almost, jumps to a different chapter of the story. But basically in the last 18 months, that changed.
Would you just be able to give a quick example of maybe so when someone is a member of Select and they have this card, what's like an example of like a really tangible reward that they can get from that?
Yeah. And that's actually one of the key words we use. That's a great word, tangible. Like we want things that are tangible, significant, and relevant to daily life. And we want them to happen at point of sale, not be earned or accrued or have some sort of restricted access. Like everything we have, access is instant and unlimited. So the types of benefits you'll see, it varies a little bit by category. In the dining sector, which is our most popular category, it's a combination of priority access plus either a discount, so anywhere from 20 to 40% off the full bill, or a round of drinks, or in some cases, both. So it's always this like, good sort of happy place of like experience meets value, and with really, really great places. And the cool thing is, because access is instant and unlimited, if your favorite place is on there, you can go there every single day and get that benefit for you and typically everyone you're with. Sometimes there's a cap, parties of 8 or above or whatever, but typically you and everyone you're with. Massive value prop, and a really strong thing. In nightlife is a little unique, not one of our most popular categories, but is popular with a certain demographic set, right? Younger people, essentially. There it's either typically like guest list access, or like second round free, or buy one, get one, or some sort of table thing or a combination.
Got it.
That's what we'll see in that area. And then with most other businesses, it typically is a discount. So like with hotels, we say up to 60% off. I've actually seen as high as 74% below the lowest publicly available rate. It averages out to around 30% below that average rate. So like on a booking basis, most people are saving $256 a booking, about $90 a night. And then most other categories are similar, just varying percentages depending on what the category is. And we've got movie theaters, gyms, spas, retailers, sports teams, pretty much everything you can imagine.
It's amazing. And yeah, I had a look at some of the places that you partner with, and they're actually, just to be clear for the audience, they're actually places you'd actually want to go to. Because I think the problem with a lot of these other programs is that, you might get like a buy one, get one free, but it's at some chain restaurant that you'd never actually want to go to. Right. And these are actually like quality venues. So that's, I guess.
Yeah. It's been cool to kind of collect like, a number of the actual like highest grossing places in these categories, places like Tao and Catch and STK, and sort of these brands that are known not just in the US, but in many cases worldwide. And like we're also not just targeting that kind of place. Like, of course we want that because that's where the most people are going. But we also want the neighborhood hotspot. We also want the Michelin-starred fancy place. Like we want to make sure there's something for everyone's taste and for every occasion.
Got it. So I'm curious how you actually grew this up from the start, because you kind of got two sides. You got the partners that you need to grow these partnerships with and actually get the venues on board. And then you got the consumers that you need to actually have as members. So yeah, how did you approach that problem initially and build up those two sides?
Yeah, and that's one of the trickiest challenges with this business is it's a real marketplace, and it can be hard to get one before the other. In our case, we felt like the partnership side had to lead. So Select doesn't ever pay for any kind of benefits, but we also generally aren't receiving revenue either. Sort of normally speaking, like that side felt like it needed to lead, and then that would create enough of an attractive point to start bringing some members in, and then you can start to grow it. Like we did see in early beta tests, we had collected a decent number of partners and not so many members. So we need a solution to that problem, and we actually basically set up a B2B relationship with a publicly traded real estate investment trust that owned a few buildings here. So they purchased 1,400 memberships for a couple of their buildings, which, look, when someone else is buying it for you, it's not quite the same utilization rate, but being able to pump in 1,400 people without you're actually making money is a pretty rare thing for a startup. So that kind of gave us this great foundation that we were then able to like layer direct consumer advertising on top of, because like some people are already using this already. Now we're going to advertise it. And quite frankly, on the advertising front, it took off almost right away. Essentially the only thing there was like, I had to sort of, that was in a pretty lean days of Select, and I sort of had to make the bet that like that expenditure was something we needed to do and was worthwhile and would work. But as soon as we did, it did. And, I think it just spoke to kind of this gap in the market that frankly still exists. People are not satisfied with what their current card reward options are and are willing to pay for, an extra fee for, at this time, this program that would attach with any existing card.
Got it. So essentially you've got on your partnership side, it's kind of a no-brainer for them in a way, because you're coming to them and saying, hey, you don't have to pay us anything, just offer some sort of reward, which is probably which will result in increased business anyway.
Right.
And it's like marketing for your business and you don't have to pay us anything. So it's kind of a no-brainer for them in a way. And then on the consumer side, once you kind of built up enough partnerships and then you did some advertising, it kind of just makes sense as a value prop for them as well.
Definitely. Yeah. On the merchant side, sort of the key tipping point is having the right kind of brands on. The main risk is sort of to their brand. So if they see, like once Tao sees Catch once Audi sees BMW or whatever the case may be, those brands will come on because like brands are participating and they don't want to miss out. And sort of the thing that's been uniquely good over time is sort of as all of our press built up and we got called things like AMEX for the next generation, that kind of stuff. That creates a whole like sort of added hype element to it, if you will, that makes businesses that much more excited to participate. And then the last piece is just that it works. Like most, our annual partner retention rates over 95%. Most of the contracts are month to month. The reason for that is that it does what it's supposed to do, which is bring the right people, and that's something that is really hard to do otherwise.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And so, was that actually was it a deliberate strategy to kind of start, I guess, with the partners to kind of start for the real like top ones like the towels or some of the venues you were mentioning before, and then kind of work down? Was that actually the strategy? Or?
It was. So like there's like a set sort of like tier guidelines we have in general. Like we won't go lower than A. Obviously we'll go as high as we can, of course. But what we wanted to do was sort of get those best in category leaders. So like for a trendy, popular restaurant, Tao literally is the leading restaurant in the US. I think they hold about 6 of the top 20 grossing spots. So there's really no one quite like them. And obviously some of those are other concepts they own, but number 1 is Tao, number 3 or 4 is Tao. So different locations. So like they are that, but then also getting like, Michelin starred places or places that are neighborhood hotspots or whatever the case may be. As those come on, those become good selling points to other like restaurants. And look, we actually see this even today still a little bit. Like if restaurants feel like there aren't places like them on, they are a little more hesitant. And then once they are, it can be a lot easier because people sort of want to be in the right comp group.
Yep, makes sense. So I guess what's next for Select? Because you mentioned that right now it's kind of links to an existing debit card, or bank card. But is that something you're looking at changing, or what's sort of your next main project with the business?
Yeah, so our big sort of like largely behind the scenes but starting to talk about it publicly initiative is that we're going to launch our own credit and debit cards. So we have all the partnerships established for that. And of course, the idea there is, to have rewards that actually feel like rewards and sort of make these instruments or payment methods, whatever you want to call them, that are supposed to enable and empower our lives, like actually have them make our lives better. And the way we're going to do that is, of course, attaching everything we have today to those cards, but we've also done a good job negotiating, and the cards will, by pretty much every facet, lead the industry. So like the big sort of like no one can copy it major value prop hook is this massive benefits network that we've created over the last several years. In addition, it's going to have the highest minimum cashback or points of any card in the market today. It's going to have the highest maximum points or cashback of any card in the market today, and all of these benefits. So it sort of creates this no-brainer opportunity. And look, it's still no small undertaking. It definitely took time to get these deals together. There's plenty more hurdles to come, but we definitely see it as a huge and very exciting opportunity. Like we get to, frankly, for people that get rewards cards, that's the number 1 criteria they're looking for. So we get to improve this product that everyone has to have, that everyone gets to use every day, by the significant order of magnitude on what they care the absolute most about. And I think that's kind of like a really cool opportunity.
Yeah, It's amazing. And it's kind of bringing together your two backgrounds, I guess, finance with
Yeah,
your
it's funny.
first business in college.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's funny. It's sort of like the perfect synergy, and it's a pretty unique background. So it's interesting they created this kind of company.
Yeah, it's cool. I'm just curious with those sort of deals, how did the conversations even start with them? Was that like from a network, or was it just that, they were they approaching you because they just saw the amazing network you had, or what kind of how did that
That's
come
a
about?
great question too, actually. So how it started is a lot of the big players were approaching us,
Mm.
the major networks, the major issuers, that kind of thing. And pretty early on, this started. This started really back in 2015 as we were first coming out the gate. They just hadn't seen anything like us yet. So
Yeah.
like like we were invited to be a finalist in the first Visa Everywhere initiative. We did a comparable thing with MasterCard out on the East Coast. We had all sorts of different issuers that I'm unfortunately not allowed to say who they are, approaching us about various things, pretty much everything. However, when we started this company, even though like this was the space where we saw the opportunity, to be honest, we never dreamed that we would be doing our own card because that wasn't possible at that time.
Mm.
And look, with this business, there's been two big market changes, one negative, one positive. The negative one was when chip and pin got adopted in a mass way. That makes the card linking a lot harder,
Right.
right? Because you can't sort of like, it's at best a legal gray area to try to replicate a chip onto a new different card at best. So we had to strip away a lot of that language, makes the product a little less exciting, whatever the case may be.
Mm.
We were able to overcome that just by really digging in and really building a great product, and all the different things we need to do on the marketing front. And then the other one that was a big opportunity started around 18, 20 months ago, where these banks started to partner with startups for credit cards. And this has started in different areas of the market even before that, where banks were partnering with startups for debit cards or investment accounts. And this is really, I actually think it's the beginning of a pretty big wave, because you're talking about an industry where like competition was almost not allowed. It was like
Mm.
almost impossible to compete with these companies. So you've got these huge legacy players that are so trapped by their systems, by regulations, by corporate structure, by everything, that are just sitting. And now you've got these new companies coming out saying, we're going to do things a different way, a better way, whatever. And there's already several success stories, like obviously Robinhood in the investing arena. I actually think Dave is an interesting comp to us, totally different products, but Dave is basically like a debit card that is supposed to make banking more human. Like the first thing they did was remove overdraft fees. US banks collect over $34 billion a year in overdraft fees. Obviously that's money getting ripped away from people that desperately need it. Sort of around that created this nice experience, and now has all sorts of smart features. And they just exploded. I think what we're sort of doing in the rewards credit space is speaking to a completely different set, but in sort of a similar way, kind of like giving them the most valuable thing that this sort of product can give them. So it's really exciting. And look, like even frankly, if it's like not us that ends up being the new AMEX or whatever, like it's incredible that like we're actually approaching a time where these kinds of companies can be created, and where these legacy players are finally going to be challenged.
Yeah, it's so exciting to see, especially in this space, which is probably one of the last remaining really archaic kind of spaces. So
Agreed. Yeah. In terms of like huge industry, super archaic. So for so long devoid of competition. I mean, look, we meet with all these entities. A lot of them were founded in like the 1800s, or 1900s, whatever. Definitely varies, but a lot of these are serious legacy players. Now you've got some upstarts having some success, and it's going to be interesting to see. Now there's like a whole emergence of like platforms to power people innovating in these areas. So it's pretty cool.
So exciting. Yeah, I can't wait to see how it plays out and what you do with
Yeah.
Select. So it's great to see. But yeah, sort of wrapping up towards the end here, Carlo. It's been great to go through your journey and everything you've gone through with Select and all your previous ventures. But I guess, is there anything I haven't asked you, or just anything you want to make sure you pass on to the audience before we finish up?
I think we covered a lot of stuff. Obviously, I think perhaps something to end with for those interested in entrepreneurship is make sure you're ready. It's quite a difficult road. It can be financially rewarding, but it's typically not. Important to know that. And then if you're going to do it, for sure, take advantage of the numerous resources and people that speak to how to be successful here. Like that was one of the things I felt like was fortunate is like, with the whole internet era, like there's so many resources available to kind of guide you through fundraising. What do I need to have for this stage? How do I do this? How do I do that? And then also reaching out to people. And I think something too is like if, I saw this a lot when we were first starting, like just because someone's done well in general business doesn't mean they know anything about startups. So don't feel like those are necessarily the right mentors for you. Usually it's far more valuable to have someone who knows startups inside and out because it's just dramatically different. The growth expectations are dramatically different. What investors want to see is dramatically different. So, take advantage of the resources in your network. And, it is an exciting journey, but definitely a difficult one.
Yeah. Well, thank you for providing a resource to people listening to this in terms of sharing your
Yeah,
journey.
of
So,
course. Yeah.
what's the best way for people to connect with you, Carlo, if they want to say hello or check out Select?
Yeah, I'm on. So checking out Select is just meetselect.com. And then checking out me, I'm on all the platforms. So Instagram at Carlo Cisco, LinkedIn is something similar. You can just look up my name or whatever. But I'm on everything under my real name, and then Select is on everything as the Select card or at Meet Select. Definitely our Instagram's gotten pretty popular as a way of checking out what we're all about.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely showcases the best. So I'll make sure we link up all the main ones so that
Awesome.
people can find you easily. But yeah, it's cool, Carlo. You're definitely you're changing the credit card industry, and as you said,
We
like
hope.
just
No, we hope.
in the process of it, and I'm sure you will continue to. And Amex for the next generation. It's a very fitting title, and I think it describes the business very
Agreed.
well. So
I was very lucky that someone dragged that out before I did.
it's fantastic. So yeah, thank you very much for coming and sharing your journey on the show today, Carlo. I really appreciate your
Yeah, of
time.
course. Thanks for having me.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening to this interview with Carlo today. Hope you got a lot of value from him sharing his journey. And if you did, can you please go into whatever podcast app you're using and leave the show a rating and also a written review? That really helps me out more than you know, and I would really appreciate it. And you can also help me out by taking a screenshot of yourself listening to the interview, post that to Instagram stories. You can tag me in that. My handle's at jharris, which is JHARRISS, and tag Carlo in that as well to thank him for coming on here and sharing his journey and wisdom. So thanks again for listening to this interview. Hope you have a great day, and we'll speak again soon.